The morning sun filtered gently through the blinds of Henry Smith's office, perched at the summit of a gleaming skyscraper in Manhattan. At 35 years old, Henry exuded power and control, yet today his demeanor betrayed something uncharacteristic unease. The city stretched below him, a sprawl of concrete and glass, mirroring the impenetrable coldness he had so carefully cultivated over the years. His stormy gray-blue eyes, typically sharp and calculating, now carried a shadow of worry. Running a hand through his impeccably styled dark hair, a rare tell of his growing tension, Henry stared out at the city. The quiet knock on his door brought his focus back. Roy, his ever-reliable assistant, entered with measured steps, a briefcase in hand. "Mr. Smith, here are the profiles you requested." Henry took the folder, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Roy. Any updates on the investors' meeting?" "Yes, Sir," Roy began, then hesitated slightly. "They've confirmed for next month, but—" Henry's gaze narrowed. "But what?" Roy cleared his throat. "There's some concern regarding your personal life, specifically your bachelor status. It's giving the investors pause." Henry muttered a low curse, his suspicions confirmed. The conservative investors he needed to win overvalued not only financial acumen, but the appearance of family stability. His sharp mind began weaving through possibilities. "Cancel my afternoon schedule," Henry instructed. "I've got a plan." Across town, in a modest apartment in the Bronx, 28-year-old Ava Miller awoke to the blaring screech of her alarm clock. She groaned, her sleep-heavy green eyes focusing on the glowing numbers. 5:30? "Great," she muttered, swinging her legs out of bed. Ava rushed through her morning routine, tying her long brown hair into a quick ponytail before slipping on her cafe uniform. Entering the kitchen, she found her 16-year-old sister Harper, already preparing breakfast. "Morning," sleepyhead Harper teased with a grin. "Cutting it close again, huh?" Ava smiled, grabbing a piece of toast. "No way. I can't risk losing this job." The light banter faded as the sisters exchanged a knowing look. Their family's finances had been a constant strain since their mother's health began to deteriorate. "How's Mom?" Ava asked, taking a quick sip of her coffee. Harper's cheerful expression faltered. "The same. The doctor said she needs a new treatment, but it's expensive." Ava sighed, placing a comforting hand on her sister's shoulder. "Don't worry, Harper. We'll figure it out. We always do." With a quick kiss on Harper's forehead, Ava dashed out the door to catch the subway. During the ride, her thoughts spiraled between worry and determination. She would do whatever it took to ensure her family's stability. The cafe bustled with its usual chaos, customers rushing in and out, orders mixing up, tips coming in sparsely. Despite the whirlwind, Ava kept her smile steady, though inside she felt the weight of her responsibilities pressing down. That was when he walked in. Henry Smith, clad in a tailored suit that screamed wealth, stood out like a beacon against the cafe's modest backdrop. His piercing gaze swept across the room until it landed on Ava. With purposeful strides, he approached the counter, an enigmatic smile playing on his lips. "Ava Miller?" he asked, his voice smooth but commanding. Ava blinked, startled. "That's me. Can I help you?" Henry's smile deepened slightly. "Actually, I think we can help each other." Curiosity and apprehension warred within her as Ava followed him to a quiet corner table. Once seated, Henry leaned forward, laying out a proposal that sounded straight out of a movie. He needed someone to pose as his fiancée for an upcoming event, someone capable of captivating conservative investors with an authentic love story. Ava's brow furrowed in disbelief. "Why me?" Henry's intense gaze held hers. "You have something most people lack: authenticity. It's impossible to fake. Besides, I'm offering compensation enough to clear your mother's medical debts and secure your sister's future." Ava's heart pounded. The offer was absurd, even reckless. Yet, as Henry's words sank in, The phrases medical debts and your sister's future echoed in her mind. "And if I refuse?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm within her. Henry's smile turned faintly cool. "Then I'll find someone else. But I doubt anyone else needs this opportunity as much as you do, Ava." She closed her eyes briefly, weighing the risks and the rewards. When she opened them, a resolute expression replaced her hesitation. "All right, Mr. Smith. I'll do it." Henry extended his hand, sealing the agreement with a firm shake. "Good. Preparations will begin immediately." As Ava watched Henry leave the cafe, she felt a storm of emotions swirling within her. A blend of hope and unease took root in her chest, each fighting for dominance. She couldn't help but question what exactly she had agreed to. How had her life veered so suddenly off course? Little did she know, the decision she had made would alter her life forever, pulling her into a world of opulence, mystery, and perhaps a love she never anticipated. The cool evening breeze swept through the bustling streets, carrying with it both promises of new beginnings and the weight of uncertainty. The memory of Henry disappearing into the crowd lingered vividly in her mind, like a prelude to an unwritten chapter. As the city lights glimmered and flickered around her, every step felt like a symbolic departure from her old life and a hesitant approach toward the unknown. When Ava finally arrived at the grand facade of the Plaza Hotel, she paused. The grandeur of the building, bathed in golden light, was almost surreal. A wave of disbelief washed over her. Could she, a simple girl from the Bronx, truly belong in this glittering world? The Plaza Hotel's ballroom was a masterpiece of elegance. Hundreds of candles cast a warm, golden glow, their light refracting through crystal chandeliers and champagne glasses. The city's elite moved gracefully through the space, their designer suits and extravagant gowns a testament to their wealth. Amidst the sea of sophistication, Ava felt completely out of place, like Alice stumbling into Wonderland. The contrast between her modest existence and the lavish surroundings was a stark reminder of how drastically her life was changing. The pearl necklace she wore, alone from Henry for the evening, felt impossibly heavy against her skin. The navy blue gown, though perfectly tailored, seemed to weigh her down with its sheer opulence. Taking a deep breath, she tried to steady her nerves. "Relax," Henry's voice murmured softly behind her. His hand rested lightly on her back, a touch that was both grounding and oddly comforting. "You're doing great." Startled, Ava turned to meet his gaze, and for a fleeting moment she caught an unexpected warmth in his usually stoic eyes. It was almost enough to make her forget the pretense of their arrangement. "I feel like a fraud," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The weight of guilt pressed heavily on her. Henry leaned in, the subtle aroma of his cologne enveloping her. "You're the most genuine person in this entire room, Ava. Trust me, that's your strength. Use it." Before she could respond, a middle-aged couple approached them. The man, gray-haired with a kind smile, extended his hand toward Henry. "Henry, what a pleasure to see you tonight," he said warmly, before turning his attention to Ava. "And who might this lovely young lady be?" Henry's smile deepened as he slid his arm protectively around Ava's waist, a gesture that startled her. "Lucas, Isabella, allow me to introduce my fiancée, Ava Miller." "Ava, this is Lucas and Isabella Brown, two of our most valued investors." Ava felt her heart pound. This was at the moment her role in Henry's plan would be tested. Summoning every ounce of courage, she extended her hand with a confident smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you," she said, her voice steady. Isabella's critical gaze swept over Ava. "Miller? I don't recall any Miller families in our circle." Panic flickered in Ava's mind, but she quickly remembered Henry's advice: be authentic. "Oh no," Ava replied with a soft laugh. "I'm not from that circle. I grew up in the Bronx. My father was a mechanic, and my mother worked as a nurse." Isabella's eyebrows lifted in surprise, while Lucas looked momentarily puzzled. Ava caught Henry stiffened beside her but pushed forward. Henry and I met at the cafe where I worked, she continued, her voice light. He ordered a double espresso and ended up stealing my heart. She glanced at Henry, offering a smile that, much to her surprise, carried genuine affection. Isabella's critical expression softened. What a charming story. And how are you finding all of this? She gestured elegantly toward the grand salon. Ava laughed, this time with real amusement. Honestly, it's overwhelming. Yesterday I was worried about paying rent. Today I'm wearing jewelry that's probably worth more than my apartment. Lucas let out a hearty laugh. What a breath of fresh air. Henry, you've certainly found a gem. Henry, who had been quietly observing, nodded. Yes, he said, his voice tinged with sincerity. I really have. As the evening unfolded, Ava found herself at the center of attention. Her candid nature and heartfelt stories captivated the room. She spoke of her childhood in the Bronx, the struggles of caring for her sick mother, and the efforts to support her younger sister Harper. Her words didn't invite pity, instead, they inspired admiration. How did you keep your family together during such tough times? An older woman asked, her eyes alight with curiosity. Ava smiled, her expression radiant. With love, determination, and a lot of sleepless nights. Hard times have a way of showing us what we're truly made of. From across the room, Henry observed Ava with growing awe. What had begun as a calculated charade was transforming into something far more profound. Ava had a way of bringing warmth and authenticity to every interaction, captivating even the most skeptical guests. Among them was Adam Ross, a formidable investor known for his sharp instincts. Approaching Henry, he spoke in a measured tone. Your fiancée is extraordinary, Smith, he remarked, his keen eyes studying Ava. Where exactly did you find her? Henry's chest tightened, though he maintained a composed facade. As she mentioned, in a cafe. Sometimes the greatest treasures come from the most unexpected places. Adam arched a brow, a faint smirk playing on his lips. Indeed, she appears to have brought some much-needed perspective into your life. As Ava stepped away from the bustling lounge, she sought a moment of quiet amidst the whirlwind of the evening. The secluded balcony she found offered a welcome reprieve, the crisp New York night air brushing against her skin like a gentle reminder of the world beyond the glittering chaos. Henry's voice broke the silence, catching her off guard. You're handling this beautifully, he said, stepping onto the balcony with her. He held out a glass of champagne, his presence both commanding and unexpectedly reassuring. Ava accepted the glass, taking a slow sip before responding. Thank you. I didn't expect any of this to feel this way. And how did you expect it to feel? Henry asked, his curiosity genuine, his tone softer than usual. Ava's gaze dropped to the city sprawling below them, its lights twinkling like stars caught in Manhattan's embrace. I thought I'd have to play a part, to pretend to be someone else. But instead, for the first time in what feels like forever, I feel like myself. Henry studied her intently, the moonlight casting a soft glow over her face. There was something about her, something beyond her appearance, that held his focus. You're remarkable, Ava, he said quietly. You've turned tonight into something more than just a performance. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, the weight of their arrangement melted away. In that quiet space, their connection felt real, untainted by the pretense that had brought them together. Ava's heart raced, not with anxiety this time, but with something far more profound and far more dangerous. The moment was interrupted by the faint sound of a throat clearing. They turned to see Adam Ross standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable, though his eyes gleamed with subtle sharpness. I hope I'm not intruding, Adam said, his voice smooth yet laced with calculated intent. Ava, my dear, your guests are eagerly waiting to hear more of your delightful stories. Ava forced a polite smile, though unease stirred within her. There was something about Adam's presence that always set her on edge. Of course, Mr. Ross, she said, her tone measured. We wouldn't want to disappoint them, would we? She glanced back at Henry briefly before stepping past Adam. leaving the balcony and the comfort of Henry's gaze behind. Henry lingered on the balcony, watching her retreat into the crowd. A strange feeling tugged at his chest, a complex blend of pride, admiration, and something far more unfamiliar. He wasn't ready to give it a name just yet. Inside, Ava navigated the remainder of the evening with grace. Her honesty and natural charm drew people in effortlessly, leaving Henry to observe from afar, increasingly aware of how much she had shifted the course of his carefully laid plans. What had begun as a strategic move to appease investors was transforming into something that threatened the boundaries of his tightly guarded heart. By the end of the night, as the final guests bid their goodbyes, their praises for Ava still ringing in his ears, Henry found himself once again beside her. The weight of the evening pressed down on her, evident in the weariness of her posture. She had entered a world far removed from her own, and though she had played her part flawlessly, the cost of it all was etched into her expression. The limousine waiting for them outside offered temporary refuge. As the doors closed, sealing them away from the noise and scrutiny, a heavy silence settled in. "You are incredible tonight," Henry said at last, his voice carrying an uncharacteristic intensity. Ava looked at him, startled by the emotion in his eyes. "Thank you," she replied softly. "But Henry, what happens now?" The question hovered between them, laden with implications neither was prepared to confront. Reaching for her hand, Henry surprised even himself with the intimacy of the gesture. "Now," he began, "we keep going. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find out this partnership is more than we thought it could be." As the limousine glided through the city streets, Ava felt the weight of change bearing down on her. Everything she knew was shifting, and though part of her feared what lay ahead, another part couldn't deny the pull she felt when she looked at Henry. The vulnerability in his eyes spoke of transformation she wasn't sure either of them were ready for. The drive to Henry's apartment blurred past her. Manhattan's endless lights flickered in the reflection of the limousine's windows, mirroring her own doubts and flickers of hope. By the time the car stopped, Ava felt both exhilarated and apprehensive, standing on the edge of a world she didn't yet understand. The morning sun streamed gently through silk curtains, its warmth pulling Ava from a restless sleep. For a brief moment she felt disoriented, the luxury of her surroundings at odds with the simplicity of her usual life. As she sat up, the reality of her situation washed over her. The soft carpet cushioned her steps as she moved toward the window, pulling back the curtains to reveal a sweeping view of the city. Below her, New York surged with life, utterly indifferent to the emotional storms brewing above. A light knock broke her reverie. "Miss Miller," came a voice from the other side of the door. "Mr. Smith asked me to let you know breakfast is served on the terrace." "Thank you," Ava replied, her voice still scratchy from sleep. She dressed carefully, deliberately choosing one of her own simple dresses rather than the extravagant wardrobe Henry had provided. Staring at her reflection, Ava hardly recognized herself. The bright optimism that usually lit her green eyes was dulled by the weight of uncertainty. On the terrace, Henry was already seated, his coffee steaming beside him, as he flipped through the financial pages of the morning newspaper. The sunlight bathed his sharp features, but his expression softened as AVA approached. An automatic smile graced his lips, a rare moment of warmth in his otherwise composed demeanor. "Good morning, Ava. I hope you slept well," he greeted, setting the paper aside briefly. Ava nodded as she took a seat across from him. "Yes, thank you. The room is very comfortable." A tense silence settled over the table, the kind that weighed heavy with unspoken thoughts. Ava reached for the coffee pot and poured herself a cup, her movements deliberate but slightly hesitant. Henry observed her quietly, noting the understated simplicity of her dress and the subtle tension in her shoulders. After a moment, he broke the silence. "Are you all right?" he asked, folding the newspaper and leaning forward slightly. Ava hesitated, stirring her coffee absently. I don't know," she admitted, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "This is all so different from anything I've ever known. I feel like I'm losing myself." Henry frowned, concern flickering in his eyes as a deep line creased his brow. "Ava, this is only temporary. You're doing an incredible job. Once everything is settled, you'll be able to return to your life." Though he meant his words to reassure her, they instead struck a nerve. Return to her old life? The thought twisted something inside Ava. After a taste of this world, its luxury, its endless possibilities, how could she possibly go back to the struggles that had once defined her existence? She stared into her coffee, her voice barely audible. "What if I don't want to go back?" Henry's eyes widened slightly. "What are you saying?" Taking a deep breath, Ava found the courage to give voice to her internal conflict. "Henry, I grew up scraping by, dreaming of something better for my family. Now, I'm living that dream, even if it's all pretend. How can I just let it go and step back into my old reality?" Henry's gaze didn't waver. Leaning closer, his voice took on an intensity that matched the emotions in her words. "Ava, you don't have to turn off who you've become. What you've earned here, respect, admiration that's real. It has nothing to do with money or status. It's because of who you are." His words touched her, stirring something deep within. Yet they didn't ease the turmoil she felt. Standing abruptly, Ava moved to the edge of the terrace, the city stretching endlessly before her. "But what about my family? My sister, my mother, they rely on me. How can I balance this new world with the life they need me to live?" Henry followed her but stopped a few paces away, giving her space. "Maybe it's not about choosing one over the other," he said gently. "Maybe it's about finding a way to embrace both." Ava turned to him, surprised by the kindness in his voice and the understanding in his expression. For a fleeting moment, she saw a version of Henry that few likely knew, a man whose vulnerability was carefully hidden beneath layers of control. It was both comforting and unsettling. Their moment was interrupted by the insistent buzz of Ava's phone. She glanced at the screen. Harper. With an apologetic look at Henry, she answered. "Hey, Harper, what's going on?" Her sister's voice came through, laced with worry. "Ava, where are you? You didn't come home last night, and the cafe followed, wondering why you missed your shift this morning." Ava closed her eyes, guilt washing over her. In the whirlwind of recent events, she had completely forgotten her responsibilities at home. "I'm sorry, Harper. I've been working on something important. I'll explain everything when I get back, okay?" Reassuring her sister as best as she could, Ava ended the call and turned back to Henry. The inner conflict was written all over her face. "I need to go," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "My family, they need me right now." Henry nodded, his expression steady yet laced with understanding. "Of course. But Ava, remember this, you don't have to face anything alone. If there's ever something you or your family need, I'm here." His sincerity caught her off guard. For a moment, she simply stared at him, unsure how to respond. "Thank you, Henry. I'll be back for the next event." As she gathered her things, preparing to leave, Henry watched her with a mix of admiration and concern. The clarity of his emotions surprised him. What had begun as a calculated arrangement now felt like something far more unpredictable and infinitely more dangerous for the careful walls he had built around himself. Back at her modest apartment in the Bronx, Ava was met with an eager embrace from Harper. "Ava, we were so worried," Harper exclaimed, pulling her older sister inside, her eyes searching for reassurance. Ava managed a smile, though guilt tugged at the edges of her expression. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. It's been a hectic week." From her usual spot in the worn armchair, Emma looked up, her face pale but her eyes lighting with joy at the sight of her eldest daughter. "Ava, my darling, I'm so glad you're home." Kneeling beside her mother, Ava gently took Emma's frail hand in hers. "Mom, how are you feeling?" Emma's smile was soft but unwavering. "Better now that you're here. But Ava, you seem different. Is there something going on?" The question hung in the air, and Ava hesitated. The weight of her secret felt heavier in the familiarity of home. How could she explain the double life she was leading without risking the stability they all depended on? After a pause, she opted for a half-truth. "I've started a new job," she said carefully. "It's an amazing opportunity, but it's been demanding." Harper tilted her head, her sharp eyes picking up on the tension in Ava's tone. "What kind of job, and why are you dressed like that?" Only then did Ava glance down, the elegant dress she wore suddenly feeling conspicuously out of place in their humble apartment. "It's for corporate events," she explained, straightening the fabric nervously. "I have to dress the part." Emma's gaze lingered, her intuition as a mother cutting through Ava's guarded words. "Ava, you know you can tell us anything, don't you?" Ava's heart clenched, torn between the desire to confide in her family and the fear of exposing them to the complexities of her arrangement with Henry. "I know, Mom," she replied softly, forcing a smile. "And I promise I'll tell you everything when the time is right." Later that night, as Ava lay on her narrow bed, she stared at the ceiling, her thoughts divided between two conflicting worlds. On one side, the warmth and familiarity of the Bronx, with its struggles but also its unconditional love. On the other, the glittering possibilities of the life Henry had drawn her into a life she couldn't quite bring herself to trust. Reaching for her phone, Ava read Henry's last message. "I hope you got home safely. Remember, I'm here if you need anything." Her eyes welled up, and a solitary tear slipped down her cheek. How could she possibly choose between the two worlds pulling at her? How could she hold on to her sense of self in a reality so far removed from her own? With those questions echoing in her mind, Ava finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, her dreams a chaotic blend of extravagant ballrooms and the familiar streets of the Bronx. As Ava slept, unaware of how much her life was already changing, the challenges awaiting her were greater than she could imagine. Meanwhile, New York hummed with its ceaseless energy, oblivious to the personal battles unfolding within its walls. High above the city, in his private office, Henry Smith sat alone. Normally a command center for high-stakes deals, the space now felt more like a sanctuary. The evening sky outside was painted in fiery hues of orange and pink, its beauty a stark contrast to the inner turmoil Henry was wrestling with. The untouched glass of whiskey in his hand reflected the tension in his heart. For the first time in years, his thoughts were far from business, they were consumed by Ava Miller. The memory of her smile lingered, as vivid as the lights of the city sprawling below him. He could still see the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about her family, a light so genuine. It felt foreign in his world of calculated precision. A knock on the door pulled him from his reverie. Roy, his loyal assistant, stepped in with a folder in hand. "Mr. Smith, here's the background report you requested on Miss Miller." Henry hesitated before taking the folder. He wanted to know more about her, about the life she had led before stepping into his, but guilt pricked at his conscience. Was it right to pry into her past? "Thank you, Roy," he said, setting the folder aside without opening it. "You can head home for the night." Left alone once more, Henry glanced at the folder but resisted the urge to read it. Instead, he picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over Ava's name before he finally pressed call. In her Bronx apartment, Ava was helping Emma into bed when her phone vibrated in her pocket. Seeing Henry's name on the screen sent a wave of conflicting emotions through her: nervousness, excitement, and something else she couldn't quite place. Stepping into the living room, she answered. "Hello?" Henry's voice, softer than usual, came through the line. "Ava, I hope I'm not interrupting." "No, you're not," she replied, sitting down on the worn sofa. "Is everything okay?" There was a brief pause on his end, as though he was weighing his words. "I just wanted to check in, to see how you're doing. After everything, I was worried." Her heart skipped a beat. It was the first time Henry had reached out to her outside the confines of their arrangement. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice carried the weight of her struggles. "Balancing everything is tough. but I'm managing." Henry closed his eyes, imagining her small apartment and the life she had described to him, a world so different from his own. "Ava, I know I've asked a lot of you. If there's anything you need." She cut him off gently. "Henry, why are you really calling?" The question caught him off guard, leaving him momentarily speechless. I don't know," he admitted finally. "I guess I just needed to hear your voice." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken emotions, a connection forming between two people caught in an improbable situation. Neither could fully explain it, but both felt it deeply. Ava felt her heart constrict, caught between the growing pull she felt toward Henry and the fear of stepping too deeply into a world that wasn't hers. "Henry," she began, her voice unsteady. "What are we doing? This wasn't supposed to feel real." Henry rose from his seat and moved to the window, gazing out at the sprawling city below. The shimmering lights of Manhattan seemed inconsequential compared to the storm of emotions swirling within him. "I know," he said softly, "but Ava, you've changed something in me. For the first time in years, I'm questioning everything I thought mattered." His words rippled through Ava like waves crashing against a shore. She turned her gaze to the familiar comfort of her small apartment, the framed photos of her family on the walls, the well-worn furniture steeped in memories. "I'm confused too," she admitted, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "You've shown me a world I never dreamed of, but I'm scared of losing who I am." Henry's jaw tightened as guilt welled up inside him. He had brought Ava into his world, asking her to navigate its complexities without considering the toll it might take. "Ava," he said, his voice earnest, "you're the most genuine person I've ever met. Don't let anything not me change that about you." Tears traced silent paths down Ava's cheeks. What if it's already too late? What if I'm already changing? Henry took a step closer, her words piercing him in a way he hadn't anticipated. He realized he didn't just want her partnership for the sake of their arrangement, he wanted to understand her, to be part of her world. "Then we'll change together," he said quietly. "Ava, I want to know your life, your world, as much as you've seen mine. Can I visit you tomorrow?" The suggestion left Ava momentarily stunned. The idea of Henry Smith, a man known for his commanding presence and high-stakes business acumen, standing in her modest apartment, felt surreal. "Are you sure?" she asked hesitantly. "Absolutely," he replied without a moment's pause. The following morning, Henry stood outside Ava's apartment building, feeling a sensation he wasn't accustomed to: nervousness. The man who negotiated deals worth millions with unshakable confidence now found himself hesitating before a simple door. When Ava opened it, she stopped short, her eyes widening at the sight of Henry dressed down in jeans and a polo shirt. "Hi," she said, a shy smile curving her lips. "Come in." Henry stepped inside, his gaze drifting over the compact but welcoming space. The modest apartment exuded warmth, a sense of home that his luxurious penthouse could never replicate. "It's cozy," he said sincerely, nodding with appreciation. Ava felt herself relax, relieved by his genuine reaction. "Thank you. It's not much, but it's ours." At that moment, Harper emerged from her room, halting abruptly at the sight of Henry. "Ava, who's this? Wait. Are you Henry Smith?" Henry smiled, extending his hand toward her. "You must be Harper. Your sister talks about you all the time." Harper's eyes darted between Henry and Ava, her expression a mix of astonishment and curiosity. "Ava, you didn't tell me you knew Henry Smith." Caught between two worlds, Ava flushed with embarrassment. "It's complicated, Harper." The tension was interrupted by Emma's faint voice calling from her room. "Ava, who's here?" After a brief pause, Ava led Henry into her mother's room, her heart racing with anticipation. Emma's frail figure rested against the pillows, but her eyes sparkled with warmth as she took in their guest. "So, "You're the Henry Smith I've been hearing about," Emma said, her voice soft but welcoming. "Ava talks about you." Henry was struck by the love and resilience radiating from this family. It was a depth of connection his wealth could never buy, a richness he had never known. The morning unfolded in a series of heartfelt conversations. They shared stories that painted vivid pictures of their lives, and Henry listened intently, moved by the strength and humor that bound them together. As he prepared to leave, Henry turned to Ava, gratitude and something deeper reflected in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion, "for showing me what truly matters." Ava stood in the doorway, watching as Henry walked away. Something had shifted between them, something she couldn't yet define. What had started as a business deal now felt like the beginning of something real, something she wasn't sure she was ready for, but couldn't ignore. Later that evening, as she sat on her bed, Ava's emotions swirled in a storm of uncertainty and hope. She reached for her diary, a ritual she had maintained since she was a teenager, and began to write. "Dear Diary, today Henry Smith stepped into my world, and for the first time I think he really saw me, not the Ava I pretend to be, but the real me. And the scariest part? I think I'm starting to see the real Henry too. What does this mean for us? For our arrangement? For my heart? Only time will tell." Closing the diary, Ava gazed out at the city that never slept. Somewhere among the glowing lights, she knew Henry was also reflecting on the day, his life, and what their paths crossing would mean for both of them. Far across the city, on the 50th floor of a towering skyscraper, Adam Ross sat in his office, a fortress of power and ambition. The sleek glass walls provided a commanding view of Manhattan, but Adam's gaze was fixed elsewhere. His attention was riveted to the computer screen before him, where a photo of Ava Miller smiled with innocent charm. Leaning back in his leather chair, Adam allowed a faint, calculating smile to touch his lips. There was something about Henry Smith's supposed fiancée that didn't quite add up. Adam Ross had built his reputation on uncovering lies and exploiting vulnerabilities, and his instincts rarely failed him. "Miss Mia," he called over the intercom, his voice smooth but firm. "Get in touch with our private investigator. I have a task that requires discretion." Meanwhile, in a quiet cafe tucked away in the Lower East Side, Ava and Henry sat at a corner table, each nursing a cup of coffee. For the first time, they were meeting in public without the facade of their arrangement, and the air between them was charged with a mix of unease and anticipation. Ava stirred her coffee absently, her eyes briefly meeting Henry's before darting away. The silence stretched just long enough to become uncomfortable before she finally broke it. So she began tentatively, "What were the investors saying after the event?" Henry smiled, some of his usual composure returning. "They couldn't stop talking about you, Ava. You impressed them more than I could have imagined." Ava felt her cheeks flush with warmth. "I was just being myself," she murmured, almost as if to convince herself. "Exactly," Henry said, his tone soft yet deliberate. "That's what makes you remarkable." For a brief moment, the bustling noise of the cafe faded away, leaving only the unspoken connection between them. Ava felt her heart race, though whether from anxiety or something else, she wasn't entirely sure. The spell was broken by the abrupt buzz of Henry's phone. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. "It's Adam Ross," he said, his tone carrying a hint of unease. Ava felt a chill run down her spine. Adam's probing gaze during the event had left her unsettled, and now her worst suspicions were coming to life. Henry answered the call, his brow furrowing as the conversation unfolded. When he finally hung up, his eyes met Ava's, filled with a gravity that made her stomach tighten. "Adam wants to meet," Henry explained. "Just me. He said he has questions about our relationship." Fear flickered across Ava's face. "Do you think he knows?" Reaching across the table, Henry took Ava's hand in his. The gesture was meant to reassure her, but the warmth of his touch sent a jolt of energy coursing through her. "Don't worry," he said, his voice steady. "Adam thrives on playing games. I'll take care of it." But even as he spoke, a shadow of doubt crept into Ava's mind. Something told her this confrontation would be far more dangerous than either of them anticipated. The next day, Henry entered Adam's office, the air heavy with unspoken tension. Adam greeted him with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes, a predator assessing his prey. "Henry, my friend Adam," began smoothly, gesturing for him to take a seat. "I must say, your fiancée is quite intriguing." Henry's expression remained carefully neutral. "Ava is extraordinary," he replied simply. Adam leaned forward, his sharp eyes narrowing. "Yes, extraordinary indeed. So extraordinary that she seems to have appeared out of thin air. Don't you find that curious?" Henry's pulse quickened, though he gave no outward sign. Years of high-stakes negotiations had taught him how to keep his composure under pressure. "Love has a way of catching you off guard," he said smoothly. "I'm sure you've experienced that." Adam chuckled, the sound devoid of warmth. "Oh, I understand surprises all too well. But this feels like there's more to the story than you're letting on." Henry met Adam's gaze, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on him. He knew Adam was circling closer to the truth, and the consequences could be devastating. Back in her Bronx apartment, Ava paced restlessly. She had shared a carefully edited version of the truth with Harper, explaining she was working on a special project for Henry, but she had kept the more precarious details to herself. Harper watched her sister with concern. "Ava," she said quietly, "are you sure you know what you're doing?" Ava stopped mid-step, looking at her younger sister with weary eyes. "Honestly, Harper, I don't know anything anymore." A knock at the door startled them both. Ava opened it to find a man in a sharp suit holding out a badge that identified him as a private investigator. "Miss Miller," he said, his tone professional but firm, "I need to ask you some questions about your relationship with Henry Smith." Ava's world seemed to tilt. She felt Harper's confused gaze burning into her back, the weight of her lies pressing down like a heavy stone. With a deep breath, she stepped aside. "Come in," she said, her voice calm, despite the turmoil swirling within her. Meanwhile, in Adam Ross's office, the exchange between him and Henry Smith had escalated into a verbal chess match. Every word carried weight, every glance a calculated move. "You know," Henry Adam began, his fingers idly twirling a sleek, expensive pen, "I've always admired your cunning, but this time I can't help but wonder, have you gone a step too far?" Henry maintained his composure, though his pulse quickened. "Adam," he started, his voice calm but resolute, "whatever you think you've uncovered." Adam cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand, his eyes glinting with a predatory gleam. "What I've uncovered, my friend, is that you're dabbling in dangerous waters. And you know what? I thrive on danger." The chilling smile that spread across Adam's face was enough to make even the seasoned businessman falter. For the first time in years, Henry felt a deep, genuine fear not for his career, but for Ava. As the night descended over New York, 3 lives stood at a precipice, entangled in a web of lies, love, and ambition. In her modest Bronx apartment, Ava Miller sat on her worn sofa, her heart pounding as she faced the private investigator. The room, small and humble, seemed to swell with the weight of her unspoken truths. "Miss Miller," the investigator began, his tone professional yet tinged with compassion. "I understand this situation is difficult, but I need you to be completely honest with me. What is the nature of your relationship with Henry Smith?" Ava's throat tightened under the enormity of the moment. Beside her, Harper clung to her hand, her quiet presence a source of strength. The air in the room was thick, heavy with tension. Ava's voice quivered. She paused, closing her eyes as if summoning courage from within. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier, though laced with vulnerability. "The truth is, Henry and I aren't actually engaged." The investigator's brow arched slightly, but his expression remained neutral. Go on, he encouraged gently. With a deep breath, Ava began to unravel the tale she had kept hidden. She explained how the arrangement had started a simple business deal, born of necessity and strategy. But as she spoke, her words became more than a confession of facts. They revealed the unexpected feelings that had taken root in her heart, growing stronger with each passing day. I never wanted to deceive anyone, she concluded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Especially not my family. I wanted to give them a better life. That's all I ever wanted. Harper, who had been listening in stunned silence, threw her arms around her sister. "Oh, Ava," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell us?" The investigator observed the emotional scene, his expression contemplative. "Miss Miller," he said gently but firmly, "do you understand the gravity of what you're admitting?" Ava nodded, dabbing her eyes with trembling hands. "Yes, I do, but I can't live this lie anymore. No matter the cost, I need to protect my family. And Henry." Meanwhile, in the sleek confines of Adam Ross's office, the tension between the two men reached its breaking point. Henry Smith, a man known for his impenetrable confidence, now felt the walls closing in around him. "So Henry," Adam said, leaning back in his chair with a triumphant smirk, "why don't you just come clean about your charming fiancée, or should I say, your hired actress?" The words hit Henry like a physical blow, though he didn't let it show. He had anticipated this confrontation, but the reality of it still stung. "Adam," he said firmly, "whatever you think you know." Adam's eyes gleamed as he interrupted. "Oh, I know plenty," he declared with relish. "I know all about your little arrangement. I know about the facade you've been selling to the world. What baffles me, Henry, is why a man like you, a powerhouse in the business world, would stoop to such a charade." Henry sat silently, weighing his options. He could deny the accusations, try to spin the truth into something palatable. But then he thought of Ava, her honesty, her courage, her ability to find light in even the darkest moments. She had shown him a side of himself he barely recognized but couldn't bear to lose. Finally, Henry spoke, his voice steady and unyielding. "You're right, Adam," he admitted. "Ava and I weren't really engaged, not at first. It began as a business arrangement." Adam leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "Ah, there it is, the truth at last. But tell me, Henry, what happens now? How will your precious investors react when they find out they've been duped?" Henry met Adam's gaze with a newfound resolve. "They'll hear it from me," he said firmly. "I'm going to tell them the truth." Adam laughed, the sound cold and mocking. "You," he sneered. "The man who built an empire on manipulation and half-truths. You expect me to believe you'll confess everything?" Standing tall, Henry's voice was unwavering. "Believe what you want, Adam. Ava has shown me there's more to life than power and money. She's taught me the importance of honesty, of family, of love." Adam's smirk faltered for a moment, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. "Love? Don't tell me you've actually fallen for her." Henry's lips curved into a genuine smile, one that carried a quiet confidence. "Yes, Adam, I've fallen in love." Back in her Bronx apartment, Ava Miller stood suddenly, her determination clear. "I need to talk to Henry," she said firmly. "We need to end this, once and for all." The investigator, sitting quietly, nodded, respect evident in his expression. "Miss Miller," he cautioned, "I must remind you the consequences could be severe." Ava glanced at her family, Harper, her younger sister, and Emma, her frail mother, who had overheard parts of the tense conversation. "I know," Ava replied, her voice steady, "but I can't live with these lies anymore. My family deserves the truth. And Henry, well, he does too." Just as she grabbed her coat, a firm knock echoed through the room. She froze. Opening the door, she found Henry Smith standing there, breathless as if he had sprinted all the way. His usually composed face was filled with emotion, his eyes betraying his vulnerability. "Ava," he began, his voice hoarse, "we need to talk." Fate, it seemed, had chosen this moment for all truths to come out. Ava stepped aside, allowing Henry into the modest apartment. The room, small but filled with love, now felt unbearably heavy with tension. Henry's eyes scanned the space, landing on the investigator, Harper, and finally Emma, before locking onto Ava. "I've told Adam everything," Henry said, his voice steady but laden with gravity. "And now I want to tell everyone the truth. No more lies, no more games." Tears filled Ava's eyes, a mix of relief and trepidation. "I was about to do the same," she admitted quietly. Henry stepped closer, taking her hands in his. He ignored the astonished looks from everyone else in the room. "Ava," he said softly, but with conviction, "what began as a business arrangement has become something I never anticipated. I fell in love with you. Your honesty, your strength, your heart." The room fell silent. Harper gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Emma leaned gently against the doorframe, her expression a mixture of surprise and quiet understanding. Ava held Henry's gaze, her own vulnerability shining through. "Henry, I fell in love with you too. But how can we build something real on a foundation of lies?" Henry nodded, acknowledging her concern. "You're right. That's why tomorrow, at the final event with the investors, I'm going to tell them everything. The whole truth. No matter the consequences. They deserve to know. Everyone does." The investigator, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. "Mr. Smith, Miss Miller, are you fully aware that your actions could have serious legal and financial repercussions?" Henry turned to him, resolute. "We are. But some things are more important than money or reputation, truth, love, integrity. Those are what truly matter." Ava, emboldened by Henry's resolve, tightened her grip on his hand. "We'll face whatever comes together," she said, her voice unwavering. As night fell over New York City, two souls, bound by an unlikely connection, stood united in their purpose. The next day would bring trials and challenges that could dismantle everything they had built. Yet, in the small Bronx living room, hope flickered, hope that honesty, no matter how painful, could become the foundation of something genuine and new. The stage was set for the final confrontation where secrets would unravel, hearts would be tested, and Ava and Henry's true characters would be revealed to the world. The fate of their love, careers, and lives hung by a thread. But for the first time, they would face everything as a team. The morning of the pivotal event dawned under a pristine, cloudless sky, a stage seemingly prepared by the universe for the drama about to unfold. In Henry Smith's apartment, an uncharacteristic stillness enveloped the space. Every move he made was purposeful, every thought measured. Standing before the mirror, Henry adjusted his tie, his reflection revealing a mixture of determination and apprehension. It wasn't just his career hanging in the balance, it was his newfound integrity and the fragile hope of a future with Ava. Roy entered, a folder in hand. "Are you ready for this, boss?" he asked, his tone both supportive and serious. Henry turned to face him, offering a strained smile. "As ready as I'll ever be to risk losing everything I've built." Roy, who had quietly witnessed Henry's transformation over the past weeks, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're doing the right thing, and no matter what happens, I'll stand by you." In the Bronx, Ava was waging her own internal battle. As she dressed, Harper stood beside her, silently helping adjust the hem of her dress. The air between the sisters was thick with unspoken emotion. Finally, Harper broke the silence, her voice tentative. "Em, are you sure about this? Once you take this step, there's no turning back." Ava met her sister's gaze through the mirror, her green eyes reflecting both fear and resolve. "I'm sure, Harp. I've spent so much time trying to protect this family that I almost lost myself in the process. Today, I'm choosing to be true to who I am, no matter the cost." Emma appeared in the doorway, leaning lightly on her cane. Despite her fragile appearance, her eyes gleamed with pride. "My brave girl," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Go and show the world what an extraordinary woman you are." Tears welled in Ava's eyes as she embraced her mother and sister, drawing strength from their love. Their unwavering support felt like a shield, protecting her as she prepared to face the challenges ahead. The grand conference hall of the Plaza Hotel buzzed with energy, filled with the most influential figures in the business world. Conversation stilled the moment Henry Smith entered, Ava Miller by his side. All eyes turned toward the couple, some curious, others scrutinizing. From a shadowed corner, Adam Ross observed with a smirk of anticipation, savoring the thought of watching Henry's fall from grace. Henry approached the podium, his every step deliberate. Silence fell over the room, thick with unspoken tension. He cast a quick glance at Ava, who nodded encouragingly, her presence grounding him. Turning to face the room, Henry's voice rang out, calm but resolute. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone steady despite the storm within. "Thank you for joining us today. Before we proceed with business discussions, there is something I must share." A murmur rippled through the room. From his corner, Adam leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with mischief, anticipating Henry's confession. Taking a deep breath, Henry continued, "For years, I built my career on calculated strategies and often half-truths. I convinced myself the ends justified the means. But recently, I met someone who showed me the true value of honesty and integrity." He paused, his gaze locking on Ava. "Ava Miller is not my fiancée. She was hired to play this role, a plan designed to impress you and secure investments." Gasps echoed through the hall, shock and indignation spreading among the crowd. Adam's smile widened, his triumph seemingly assured. But Henry's voice grew stronger, more impassioned. What began as a fabrication turned into something real, something profound. "Ava opened my eyes to a world beyond contracts and profits. She taught me about compassion, about family, and about love." Tears glistened in Ava's eyes as she stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. "It's true," she admitted. "I agreed to this arrangement because my family was in financial distress. I was desperate to help them. But in the process, I discovered that some things are more important than money. I learned the power of honesty, of integrity, and yes, of love." The room hung in stunned silence, judgment and uncertainty swirling in the air. It was Lucas Brown, one of the most respected investors, who finally broke the tension. "Well," he said, his voice carrying authority, "I think that's admirable." Heads turned as Lucas stepped forward, his words commanding attention. "Henry, you could have perpetuated this farce indefinitely. Instead, you chose truth, knowing the risks. That, to me, is worth more than any balance sheet." The murmurs shifted. Supportive voices grew louder. Isabella Brown joined her husband, addressing Ava with warmth. "My dear, your courage and sincerity are inspiring. Your love for your family and your principles are a rare gift." Adam, sensing his victory slipping away, stepped into the light. "You can't be serious. They deceived all of us," his outrage echoed, but the room was unmoved. The investors, touched by the honesty they had witnessed, expressed their admiration. Some even suggested increasing their investments, impressed by the ethical shift Henry seemed to represent. Adam's frustration boiled over. "I have proof documents exposing the full extent of this fraud." From the back of the room, the private investigator, who had been a quiet observer, stepped forward. "Mr. Ross, I suggest caution before making accusations. My investigation uncovered irregularities in your own business dealings, details I'm certain you'd prefer to remain private." Adam's face drained of color. Without another word, he retreated, defeated. The investors, sensing trouble, quickly distanced themselves from him. In the midst of the chaos, Henry turned to Ava, taking her hands gently in his. The crowd faded away as he spoke, his voice low but fervent. "Ava, you've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. I love you not as part of a facade or agreement, but completely and deeply. Would you accept me, not as a businessman, but as a man striving to be better because of you?" Tears streamed down Ava's face as she smiled. "Henry, you've changed my life too. You've shown me a world of possibilities, but more importantly, you've shown me the importance of staying true to myself. Yes, I accept you with all my heart." The room erupted into applause, but for Henry and Ava, the noise melted away. At that moment, they weren't the businessman and the waitress, nor actors in a charade. They were simply Henry and Ava, two people who had found love in the most unlikely of circumstances. In the months that followed, Henry and Ava faced many challenges. Rebuilding trust, both in their business and personal lives, was no small task. But together they created something beautiful. Henry transformed his company, prioritizing social responsibility and ethical practices. Ava, with Henry's unwavering support, founded an organization to help families facing medical hardships, an endeavor inspired by her own struggles. On a crisp autumn afternoon, they were married in an intimate ceremony in the Bronx, surrounded by Ava's family and closest friends. Harper Miller stood proudly as her sister's maid of honor, her smile radiant with joy. Emma Miller, now healthier thanks to the care they could afford, blessed them with tears of happiness as they exchanged vows. Henry and Ava knew their journey was far from over. Life would continue to test them, but they were ready to face it all together with love, honesty, and the profound truth that sometimes the best stories begin with a lie, only to blossom into something truly authentic. In a world often driven by ambition and appearances, the story of Henry Smith and Ava Miller reminds us that the most extraordinary transformations happen when we embrace truth and love. What began as a calculated plan to secure a business deal turned into a heartfelt journey of self-discovery, honesty, and connection. Ava's courage to stay true to herself and Henry's determination to confront his past mistakes not only brought them closer, but also inspired those around them to value integrity over illusion. Their journey wasn't without challenges, secrets unraveled, loyalties were tested, and risks were taken. Yet, through it all, Henry and Ava showed us that even the most unlikely circumstances can lead to something genuine and beautiful. From the grandeur of Manhattan's elite to the warmth of Ava's family in the Bronx, their story proves that love and authenticity can bridge even the widest gaps. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to support our channel by liking this video, subscribing for more inspiring content, and sharing it with those you care about. Your support allows us to continue bringing meaningful stories to life. We'd love to hear from you. What part of Henry and Ava's journey resonated with you the most? Was it Ava's unwavering love for her family, Henry's transformation, or the hope that blossomed in the face of uncertainty? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know how this story inspired or moved you. Your engagement not only fuels our creativity, but also builds a community of viewers who appreciate stories that celebrate the beauty of human connection. Thank you for being part of this journey, and stay tuned for the next incredible story waiting to unfold.